So this is a special episode. We're a bit of a mashup on some of my favorite moments across Live Well, Be Well on gut health. Now, as we're starting the new year, so many of you have asked for a specific episode on this. So I thought I'd bring my favorite moments from some of my favorite guests on gut health. So I hope you enjoy. I think a lot of our listeners would have heard, the 30 different plant-based foods a week and try to aim for diversity and abundance and, what does that look like? And we talk a lot about on this show. But I think there is a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of different voices of influence also advocating a carnivore diet or a keto diet and not including these plant-based foods. So what's kind of your answer to that? Because from what I'm hearing is that neither of them are full of ultra-processed foods. So that's a great start. But the next step is actually they are then still quite different. And what's going on with our gut health there?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's important to acknowledge there are parts of these dietary patterns that are good and that I support, as crazy as that may sound. I love the fact that they get rid of ultra-processed foods for the most part. Naturally, if you go to your store and you find ketogenic ultra-processed foods, well, that's not what we're talking about here. So any dietary pattern that eliminates ultra-processed foods, from my perspective, is a step in the right direction. That being said, a carnivore-based diet is a 100% animal product-based diet, and that is not a sustainable dietary pattern, nor is that in the best interest of your health in the long term. Mm-hmm. It can make you feel better in the short term, and that's particularly because you already have a damaged gut. People who don't have a damaged gut and they're thriving, they see no reason to pursue a carnivore diet. They would never do that. The person who's choosing to chase the carnivore diet is because they're looking for help. They're looking for a solution, and they're struggling. Specifically, they're usually struggling with gut-related issues, and they don't feel well when they increase their fiber intake, which we can unpack what's going on there and why that would be. But that's the reason why a person goes towards the carnivore diet. This is not in a sustainable dietary pattern. That is not in your best health interest in the long term. And even among influencers who have actually followed a purely carnivore-based diet, you have seen them withdraw from it. There's very few of them, but the ones who do, you've seen them withdraw from it because it's dangerous. There's issues there. Mm-hmm. So, for example, where do you get your vitamin C from?
Fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Yeah.
So vitamin C, there's a condition called scurvy. We used to see it among sailors. Now we see it among people who are too rigorously following a carnivore-based diet.
Wow, that's mad, because you actually only need such a small amount, like 200 milligrams or something, isn't it, of vitamin C that you need to not get scurvy. So actually that is such a small amount that you need, and actually having such an extreme diet can put you at risk of these patterns that we shouldn't be seeing in 2023. But actually there is a huge rise in them. Yeah.
Now, with ketogenic diet, I think that with the ketogenic diet, to me, we're really talking about a low-carb, high-fat diet. And it comes in many different varieties because, the thing about the carnivore diet is we have, in the same way that it's like the counterpoint to a vegan diet, the carnivore diet, you are not allowed to have plant-based foods if you're going to call it carnivore. If you want to call it animal-based, then it kind of creates a little more flexibility. But if it's carnivore, that is not including plant-based foods. A ketogenic diet can include many different varieties of foods, with the core piece being that it is high in fat and low in carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. And so you could do a plant-based ketogenic diet. And this, to me, can actually be a high-fiber diet. And would I sit here and say that a person is implicitly unhealthy if they're consuming this diet? Well, no. Relative to the standard American diet or the standard British diet, actually a plant-based ketogenic diet would clearly be a step in the right direction. But I do think that the elimination of certain foods, because you're going to eliminate starchy foods, which could include legumes, and you're going to eliminate certain foods that contain sugar, which, by the way, the sugar that you find in fruit is not harmful, it's not hurting you, and it's not causing weight gain. So when you eliminate these foods, I actually don't think that you're paying yourself any favors. And I don't think that the structure of being high-fat, low-carb at the expense of eliminating these health-promoting foods that include fruit and legumes and other starchy foods is not actually in your best health interest in the long term. So I do think that we can do better than a plant-based ketogenic diet. I think that we can do better by including those foods that we're excluding. But that being said, I think that that's actually a very reasonable place to start if that's the dietary pattern that you want to follow. And then we can build from there.
So what does a healthy gut microbiome look like?
Well, there's not a universally agreed upon definition of what constitutes a healthy gut microbiome, and it's a challenge because the gut microbiome is so complicated. So here's this community specifically within the gut that has 38 trillion microorganisms. Most of them are bacteria, some of them are fungi, and you could also potentially have archaea, protozoa, and then there's definitely viruses in there as well. And like dynamically by the microsecond, it is changing. And it is also like geographically variable. So like one specific part of your colon is not the same as this other part of your colon, right? The sample that you get when you poop is more representative of your rectum, which is the last part of your colon, than it would be of the cecum, which is the first part of your colon. So there's a lot of complexity that's built into that. That being said, to me, when we talk about what is a healthy gut, part of this is diversity within the microbiome. That diversity that exists is a measure of health within any ecosystem. And your gut is an ecosystem, just like the Amazon rainforest, just like the Great Barrier Reef. If you take these places, you take my backyard, and there are mosquitoes, and they annoy me. I don't like them. But you know what? To be honest with you, I don't want them to be gone. And the reason why I don't want them to be gone is because that will have a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem that will have negative consequences. The bats eat the mosquitoes, the birds eat the mosquitoes, the spiders eat the mosquitoes. And so now we start negatively affecting these things, and then it starts basically moving through the food chain. And those negative effects start to basically destabilize the entire ecosystem. That's the way that it works within our gut. There are good guys, there are bad guys. They exist in balance. When they are in balance, which, by the way, we call eubiosis. Eubiosis would be the term for a balanced, healthy gut microbiome. When they're imbalanced, the good guys are outnumbering the bad guys, and there's plenty of diversity. And because there's plenty of diversity, it is a resilient system. It is prepared to do whatever is necessary to basically serve its purpose and to support you and your body. And when we lose that diversity, then effectively we can run into situations where we need our gut to step up and do its job. It's not able to. And the most classic representation of this is when we manifest digestive symptoms. Because there are certain foods that when we consume them, we need our gut microbes in order to properly digest them. Without a healthy gut, you cannot properly digest that food. And so when your gut is struggling to keep up with the demands of what you're asking it to do, because you basically chewed something and swallowed it, and now it's their job. Like it's time for them to go to work. When they can't keep up, then they're going to let you know. And that's when you get the bloating, the gas, the discomfort, change in bowel habits, maybe diarrhea or constipation, right? That's when we manifest those things. But then there's all these other ways in which a gut can show you that it's struggling. It could be through your metabolism, your blood sugar control, your blood fat control, your cholesterol levels, your weight. It could be through your immune system, the manifestation of allergic symptoms, autoimmune conditions, how you respond to a virus. It could be through your mood, anxiety levels, depression, feeling down, feeling sadness, or alternatively, feeling optimistic and energized and having tons of energy. So these are all sort of different ways in which an unhealthy gut, we could get into hormonal stuff as well. To answer your question, there is no simple stool test or blood test or alternative way to just say that shows me everything that I need to know right there. Ultimately, we need a holistic view. And that holistic view takes into effect all of these different aspects, including symptoms that affect our digestion or our metabolism or our immune system or our mood or hormones.
I'm just thinking, if somebody came in with IBS or IBD to see you, some gastroenterologists, and I don't know if you would do this, would say go on an exclusion diet or start stripping back loads of foods. And what I hear you say is, don't be scared of these foods, introduce them slowly. And I think there's this very foggy landscape where people are so confused about what is hurting their gut that they either become quite scared of food and they totally strip it out of their diet until they've stopped having symptoms, which can massively reduce their intake of nutrients, but they're not in pain. Or they feel so overwhelmed that they don't know where to start and they carry on with these symptoms.
Yeah.
So what would be your take on how you would then advise somebody? What would you do if somebody came in with those symptoms to you?
Well, so I've dealt with this scenario a bazillion times, because irritable bowel syndrome is the most common diagnosis that exists in a gastroenterologist practice. And so there are a few things here. First of all, I can't speak for the entirety of all gastroenterologists across the globe. There's millions. There's millions of gastroenterologists. And with the internet and social media, you will find someone who will advocate for everything.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have some sort of bias and want to fulfill that bias, you will find someone in another country somewhere in the world that says that. And 99.999% of their peers may say that person is insane. And we completely disagree. And yet, if that's what you want to hear, you'll call that person a genius. And that's the world that we live in. The evidence, first of all, with regard to fiber and these conditions is clear. It's clear. People who introduce fiber into their diet, increase the fiber in their diet, this leads to better health outcomes. There's no dietary guidelines that are advising people to eliminate fiber from their diet. Temporary is a totally different thing. Temporary is part of a process. Permanent elimination, permanent restriction, that does not exist aside from people who have specific medical conditions, like celiac disease. It's a totally different thing. Like you can't take celiac disease and then generalize that out to other people who don't have celiac disease. So now when we look at like what happens in the gut microbiome when people reduce diversity within their diet, we have a number of different studies where this is the case. People may be following a gluten-free diet. And again, like if you have celiac disease, you should, but people may be following a gluten-free diet. People may be eliminating FODMAPs from their diet. And when people make these choices consistently, the gut microbiome appears less healthy in our studies. So regardless of the dietary patterns of restriction and exclusion are not the optimal long-term approach. It's clear that diversity and abundance is actually the way forward. Now, sometimes we will take one step backward so that we can take two steps forward. And that's part of the process that I describe in my second book, which was the Fiber Fields Cookbook. In the Fiber Fields Cookbook, one of the things that I'm proud of is that the book was made for people who have this exact issue, Saran. People that have irritable bowel syndrome or are struggling to add more plant-based foods to their diet, because I want to help you accomplish that. Because clearly I wholeheartedly believe in this. And so what I did is I put 2 dietary protocols in there. Basically, like just eat the recipes that are in the book. Read the chapter, eat the recipes, and it will help you sort this out. So the 2 that are in there are FODMAPs, a low FODMAP diet, and histamines, a low histamine diet. And these are things where you might actually temporarily eliminate these things like FODMAPs and histamines, go low FODMAP, low histamine. And that's a diagnostic process. That's temporary. You're going to bring it back on board. The other thing I would say real quick is the days of a one-stop shop for healthcare are gone. And so if you go to your doctor expecting your doctor to be all things all at once, that's a mistake. You need to build a team. And when it comes to nutrition, that team should include a person who's adequately qualified to talk to you about nutrition, which to me is a registered dietitian.
I'm so pleased to partner with Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to help entrepreneurs stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage your audience, and sell anything from products to content all in one place. I've been using Squarespace since day one because it's accessible and it looks professional, even for a tech phobe like me. Squarespace gives you all the tools to create and sell your own online courses. I launched my own Inner Circle membership last year using their platform. You can upload videos, customize your layouts, and add a paywall to monetize your content. Now, if you're looking to grow your business, the email campaigns feature is a game changer. It allows you to create targeted email campaigns, engage your community, drive sales, and track success with built-in analytics. Head to squarespace.com/livewell for your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LIVEWELL for 10% off a website or domain. I want to talk a bit about metabolic health and digestive health. So I think we talk a lot about, as you said, fiber and the diversity of our food, but we don't talk that much about spices when it comes to our gut health or our metabolic health. And they're kind of 2 different things. Maybe you might want to answer that in 2 different areas. But like when we're looking at spices, for somebody that's maybe suffering with inflammation in their gut, or poor digestive issues, maybe something that's quite sluggish, what should they be looking for, or what could they be incorporating when it comes to digestive health? Is there any kind of studies that show any really positive results here?
Yeah, so I'll address that question at a high level and then get into some granularity with specific spices. So at a high level, spices are really prebiotics for your gut microbiome. So they may not be fiber rich the way we think of like oatmeal or other, whole grains or lentils and legumes or vegetables, but they have polyphenols that work like prebiotics. And we know this from various studies that spice polyphenols are unpacked by the gut microbiota into beneficial postbiotics, which can then go on and have anti-inflammatory effects, increase the diversity of the gut microbiome, etc. So really, it's really beneficial to think of them as food for the gut microbiome, not as fiber, but as prebiotics.
And is there any particular ones, just before you go on, because the prebiotics is so interesting and fascinating of what you just said. So that's kind of the fertilizer for our gut. That's kind of what allows the microbes to feed on one another. Is it all spices that have these prebiotic qualities, or is there certain ones?
Yeah, so studies looked at, again, spice blends and saw that increased consumption of spice blends increased gut microbiome diversity based on this prebiotic kind of effect. But if you want to get into some specifics, I would say there's pretty good evidence for the polyphenol in the chili pepper family, which is called capsaicin, which actually creates that tingling feeling on the tongue that some people like myself are completely addicted to, that really has this kind of prebiotic effect and also affects inflammation in a desirable way. And then when it comes to specific gut health boosting spices, some of my favorites that are backed by the research are cumin, coriander, fennel, and ginger. And then also turmeric, because curcumin and turmeric has been shown, at least in vitro studies, to improve the integrity of the gut lining. And a lot of people seem to be struggling with sort of problems with the gut lining, something that, we call leaky gut. But cumin, coriander, fennel, and ginger have some really interesting properties and compounds like cuminaldehyde and cumin that seem to improve the transit time, so gut transit time, which is a really important kind of determinant of how well you digest food. Some of the negative effects like gas and bloating are sometimes caused by sluggish gut transit time. And then they can also reduce flatulence. So if you are using foods that give you sort of gassiness and bloating like beans or legumes, which are lovely, but some people have a hard time with them, adding some of these spices to the cooking process can really help improve the digestibility. And then if you're just struggling with, again, gas, bloating, feeling kind of heavy after a meal that was hard to digest, you can just whip up a tea with some cumin seeds, coriander seeds, fennel seeds, and a little bit of fresh ginger. Steep that in hot water for like 5 to 10 minutes and just drink that. It's actually an ancient Ayurvedic remedy. And there's some really interesting modern science about how those spices are boosting digestive enzyme production, reducing gas and bloating, like I said, improving gut transit time and some of those effects. So I love that, the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda is now being corroborated by a lot of modern science. And it's just such a simple, soothing ritual that you can incorporate to boost gut health.
Yeah, I just think it's completely fascinating, isn't it? It's when we're speaking a lot in the last 10 years about gut health, but spices seem to be left out of the conversation surrounding this a lot. And I don't know why, maybe because there's not as much evidence there, or there wasn't as much evidence there. And now the evidence is kind of coming through a lot more, especially in human trials, as you said. And I don't know, there's one that, I don't know if you've seen this, but there was a study that came out recently, in Portland, where they conducted a study, to look at polyphenols, which is the kind of pigment that you keep speaking about in foods and spices that's found in herbs and spices, as you said. And they looked at a person's diet to see if it had a positive impact on gut health. And they found, it's exactly what you said, certain beneficial microbes, such as lactobacillus, which we know is one that we kind of want to increase and has shown fantastic benefit for our gut health, showed an increase if participants consumed more polyphenols from spices. And some beneficial bacteria was less present in participants with a higher polyphenol intake. And that was a study that came out last month. And I think when we're kind of looking at this, it's something that it's quite simple to add into a diet rather than changing your entire diet, which is when we're looking at gut health. Normally we're trying to think, okay, well, what can we take out and what can we kind of add in? And sometimes it can become really overwhelming for people. And I think what's really interesting about this, even going back to the Penn study you mentioned, that even having, which is not what we'd always kind of want people to have, but the typical Western diet or the typical American diet, by simply starting here at the baseline and adding in spices, it can have a really beneficial effect. And that can feel less daunting for some people who are trying to like change their health, but not in such a dramatic way.
Yeah, absolutely. So you made so many great points there. I think spices have been underappreciated because of a few things. I do think the data are catching up now in humans, which is great. Up until then, we had to kind of rely on a lot of these test tube studies and animal studies. But, in nutrition, that is often the case because we don't always have the right incentives to do these very expensive, large randomized controlled trials that look at, adding more cumin to your diet or more coriander to your diet because there's not much patentability. There's not much money to be made. So I think it's a combination of things. I also think culturally, not everyone is used to cooking with spices. I come from India, where spices are just a part and parcel of kind of the everyday. That's not true for everyone. And so I think sometimes it's just kind of getting up to speed or, learning to incorporate new foods because we are all interested in augmenting our health. And we're all now cooking in a global kitchen. So we're incorporating influences from all around the world, which I think is so lovely and so special that we get to use things that may not have been part of our heritage, but now we can access them. I think all of these studies that are looking at gut microbiome diversity changes, improvements in different biomarkers of inflammation are only going to add to this body of evidence. And something that we do know, Sarah, is that spices are extremely highly concentrated in antioxidants. Everyone's interested in antioxidants in food. They want to incorporate more fruits, more vegetables, eat the rainbow, varied colors, because we know those are more antioxidant rich and polyphenol rich. And spices like cloves, for example, are some of the most concentrated sources of antioxidants from plants.
I wrote a book called Eat to Beat Disease, which is my first book that really focused on not just foods, but how the body responds to what you feed it. And it turns out that our health, including our metabolic health and the health of our healthy fat, is very reliant on our stem cells. These are stem cells, by the way. When we were formed in our mom's womb, just to go back for a second, it was all stem cells. The little ball that was us, the future us, that was all stem cells. What's a stem cell? It's very simple. It's a cell that hasn't figured out what it's going to be when it grows up. And so it can be anything. And when we were born with more stem cells than we actually needed. So there's overage, excess stem cells. In fact, when you cut the umbilical cord when you're born, there's a ton of stem cells that are still stuck in the umbilical cord. Anything in our body gets packed away in our bone marrow, in our skin, in our heart, our livers, lung, a little bit in our body fat as well. But there's this whole process that that parents are asked by their obstetricians is, hey, do you want to save your baby's your cord stem cells? And some people choose to do that. You can actually squeeze out those stem cells and put them in the bank so you can use them later should you ever need them. But I will tell you that regardless, if you don't save them, they automatically get saved in your body. It's kind of like a savings account, okay? and they get most of them are saved in our bone marrow. So what's a bone marrow? If you break open a chicken bone or a beef bone, an ossobuco, all right? If you look inside the middle of the bone, that's where the bone marrow is. That's where the stem cells live like bees in a beehive, okay? Throughout our entire life. And like bees, they will come out to the flower fields wherever they are needed. But instead of coming to pick the pollen, they're going to fix and regenerate the organs. So there are certain foods that we eat that can actually call out healthy stem cells. So what are some of these foods? Well, not only do we know what some of the foods are, we also know what's inside the food that can trigger this beneficial regenerative response. I'll give you a couple of them. Barley and mushrooms. They both contain a natural bioactive called beta-D-glucan, that's Glucan. And beta-D-glucan is a soluble fiber. So it's not roughage. It doesn't actually, it's not like makes you want to go to the bathroom and be regular. it actually dissolves. And it turns out beta-D-glucan does a lot of interesting things. It's good for your gut microbiome, but beta-D-glucan stimulates your stem cells to participate in regeneration. So you can make more stem cells work harder, faster, better for you by eating mushrooms and barley because it's got beta-D-glucan. All right, what's another food that can actually do this? Well, it turns out dark chocolate. Who doesn't like dark chocolate? Dark chocolate.
Thank goodness.
Right. That's the response I get from most people. Now, look, chocolate's a confection, so it's a candy. So I want to be really careful to make this distinction. Dark chocolate is better because it has more cacao. Cacao is a plant-based food. Comes from a cacao pod, which comes off a tree, and it is very much packed with dietary fiber, which is good for our gut microbiome, good for overall health, but it has polyphenols called proanthocyanidins, okay? So, for your listeners and viewers, don't worry if you can't pronounce or spell these things. Like, let people like me who study food as medicine do the heavy lifting for you, but just know that dark chocolate, plant-based, has more of the plant-based cacao, has these bioactives. Now, what does proanthocyanins do? These dark chocolate polyphenols, cocoa polyphenols, they call out stem cells. In fact, there was a study done out of San Francisco and the University of Texas that showed that in 60-year-old men with coronary heart disease, bad blood vessels, bad hearts, that if they drank 2 cups of dark, hot cocoa that is really enriched with polyphenols, they could double the number of stem cells in their bloodstream that can repair their circulation and improve their heart function after 30 days. So if you just drank 2 cups a day for a month, that's how this experiment was done. And then they measured the number of stem cells in the blood. That's a blood test. Bada bing, twice. All right. Then they measured functionally how resilient their circulation was. That's using a test called FMD, flow mediated dilation. How resilient are your circulation? That also doubled. That's how powerful your stem cells can actually be. And there's a whole other list of foods as well. Dried fruit, because the skin of fruits contain ursolic acid. Ursolic acid, which is found in the skin of fruits. Dried fruits, you get a lot more skin per unit that you put in your mouth, right? So it would be hard for you if you and I sat across the table from each other and we challenge each other to eat 6 apricots, all right? We could probably do it, but it wouldn't be a lot of fun. But if we had 6 dried apricots, you and I could just have this conversation right now, this podcast, and just knock them down, right? But you get all that skin. The ursolic acid is in that skin. That's another example. And by the way, if you ever try this is why it's better to, if you're going to get for the skin of the fruit, to get organic fruits, because the skin tends to accumulate the pesticides. It's very hard to wash them off.
As a nutritionist, one of the most common questions that I get asked is coffee good or bad for you? Yes, coffee is good for you, but the impact of the health benefits all comes down to how the coffee is sourced and made. What's really important to consider when choosing your coffee is knowing that not all coffee is created equally. I came across Exhale Coffee via Dr. Rupi, who oversaw 9 independent lab tests to ensure the coffee is sourced to maximize the polyphenol content. This is a potent antioxidant with anti-inflammatory properties to support overall health. Switching to a high polyphenol coffee like Exhale is also fantastic for your gut health and your brain health, because research has shown that these specific components may have a real impact on our immune response. It could even help support your oral microbiome when drinking up to 2 to 3 cups a day. But over 5 a day has been shown to have detrimental effects. Personally, I love to have my coffee an hour after waking up to allow my body to use its own natural energy resources within the first hour and to align with my circadian rhythm. What I also love about Exhale Coffee is that it's also soil certification organic certified, which means that it's free from mycotoxins, pesticides, and molds. Now, if you want to give your mornings a new routine and try Exhale Coffee, then head to www.exhalecoffee.com/Sarah to get your free trial sent to you.
I now have done some work and continue to do some work with the Royal College of Psychiatrists Eating Disorders faculty, because the hazard of this book, all the way through writing it, I was very aware that I I'm treading this knife edge where there's a group of readers who feel addicted to this that I actually want to slightly disgust with this food, because that's what was given to me, and it's been like a gift, not wanting the food. At the same time, I don't want to stigmatize anyone, the millions of people who depend on this, and make them feel shame. And I certainly don't want to generate any eating disorders. Now, so I went and spoke to Agnes Ayton, who's the chair of that faculty at the Royal College. And they have early data that really, when it comes to binge eating disorders and a lot of disordered eating, they feel that ultra-processed food may be the driver of the disorders. And this is something that B. Wilson, who's a noted food journalist, has also written about. If you create food that is engineered to disrupt your relationship with food, to drive excessive consumption, food that contains neurotransmitters, food that affects your microbiome, that affects your brain in odd ways, perhaps it is the food that is part of the engine of the pandemic of eating disorders that we're seeing in young people. Now, eating disorders are very specific. There's a lot we don't understand. But I think I'm much more at ease going, this is food worthy of critique, provided it's done with compassion, and done with an awareness that when we critique food, we critique the people who eat it and the communities that eat it, and so we have to be just hyper aware. This is food for people who live. Whilst we all eat an amount of it, it is food that is forced on people who live in disadvantage, and particularly children.
I'm so happy you use compassion there, because I think maybe listening to this, and I want to highlight it now, many people might be feeling a lot of shame, or maybe feeling scared how much they're consuming, might not be aware how much they're consuming. It's quite a big thing. And I think I know that a lot of people can eat larger quantities of ultra-processed foods than whole foods. And can you explain why? And is there any kind of like scientific data that shows this on how much more we might consume? Because that's also a huge other trigger for people to stop eating. As you said, you were overeating and then you wanted to be sick because you could consume this amount of food because it was ultra-processed.
So I'm so pleased you've said that. You know, I did a lot of publicity around the book, and I was quite good at always putting in these caveats. And then you reach a sort of familiarity with it all, and you think, well, everyone's heard me say that. But I think it's really important to say to people who are listening, if you are struggling with this food, it is food that has been engineered by, you have no idea of the number of PhDs that have gone into this sandwich, into every single one of the ingredients, the way they're put together, the packaging, the smell. Everything has been optimized to fiddle with your relationship with food and to get you to eat as much of it as possible. That's why when you eat this sandwich, you never leave a quarter. I mean, this sandwich has how many calories in per... God, my eyesight, energy, kcal. Can you see how many calories per pack?
So per pack, you've got, oh, wow.
How much is it?
862.
That's what I thought it said. But then I was like, really? I think you're right. I mean, that just feels ridiculous.
That feels mad, doesn't it?
No, it's 370. It's 370. They're doing joules and calories. I mean, they're making this very hard. The two of us. We know something about nutrition. Okay, so it's 370. Now, there are lots of...
anyone else is confused, we're
there, and also just we all need glasses. So there are lots of sandwiches in Pret that are over 500 calories. You will never, ever leave a quarter of a sandwich behind. You will be licking out every single last crumb. And that's because it's been designed. So if you're struggling with the food, the sort of strapline of the book is, it isn't you, it's the food. So how does it do it? What's the mechanism? We actually understand quite a lot about how the food does this. And we've got really good studies going back to the 90s that when food is soft and when it's energy dense, that those are two really important properties to drive excess consumption. So ultra-processed food, simply because it has been so physically mangled, chemically, thermally, and physically, it's been actually processed, very small particle size. This sandwich feels like it's got a bit of texture, but you can compare this to if you made this with rye bread and chunks of tuna and bigger bits of cucumber, it'd take you twice as long to eat.
That's a good point, actually.
The energy density is partly because the food is dry. Now, there is some illusions of moisture in a lot of the products that comes from using sugars and oils, but it's generally bone dry because water is expensive to ship around, and water reduces shelf life. So what you want is very, very dry food, so the food has a nearly infinite shelf life. What you want is to be able to make your mince pie, say, in February for next Christmas, because it's going to take the factory a long time to make, the 20 million that you need to produce. So the energy density and the softness mean you consume calories, just you swallow them at a rate that your body has not evolved to keep up with. Real food, even a fatty marbled steak, A, you have to cut it and chew it, and B, steaks are full of water. They're actually quite low energy density, even if they're very fatty. So the second thing is, the food tells you a series of lies. So whether it's the non-nutritive sweeteners or the flavor enhancers or the gums replacing the fat, there are lots of things that signals arrive in your mouth that then the nutrition doesn't deliver. So we understand this best with the artificial sweeteners or the non-nutritive sweeteners. It doesn't matter if they're natural. You don't taste sweet in your mouth, right? You don't have sweet detectors on your tongue because it's fun. You have it to signal to the inside of your body, organs like your pancreas, that refined sugar is on its way. And so you better release insulin and other hormones to deal with the refined sugar. And this is why we have a sweet taste, because humans are quite good at eating sugar. Now, if you put sweet taste on the tongue and the sugar never arrives, we used to think that would then boost your insulin, lower your blood sugar, and then you'd eat more sugar elsewhere. So if you're drinking a Diet Cola, you'd eat more fries. It seems from a really big paper published last summer, most of the artificial sweeteners put your blood sugar up. So we think this is part of a stress response. If you put sweet on the tongue and the sugar never arrives, this is incredibly confusing for your body. For millions of years, if you put sweet taste on the tongue, sugar then arrives in the body, honey or whatever. So the lies seem to be important. Flavoring, coloring, marketing is a big part of excess consumption. But it's not so much about any one of the ingredients or properties. It's the whole gestalt, the entire, every single aspect of the food has been optimized. So you can't really tease it apart. It's like going, why are we all addicted to our phones? Are you addicted to your phone because of its camera or it's the apps, or is it the sleek feel or the buttons or the swipey?
It's the ping of a message, the dopamine hit that you get.
But it's all of it, isn't it? It's every aspect is just designed, from the acoustic of the ping to your relationship with the brand. So you can't tease it apart. And that's a really important thing for understanding why you can't really reformulate ultra-processed food. So we see this, the best example is with a Diet Cola. I mean, Diet Cola is like the ultimate solution, isn't it? It's a perfect fix. They're basically indistinguishable, 0 calories. Why aren't diet drinks solving at least the proportion of the obesity epidemic that's due to soft drinks? They're just not. And we've massively increased our consumption. The non-nutritive sweeteners are probably a bit better than sugar. I mean, my colleagues who I really trust would all say that. I'm a bit on the fence about it, but they're probably not much worse. And yet they really aren't solving the problem. So even the best reformulation doesn't work. That's why we think that to change population health, we have to switch people away from an industrial diet back to sort of eating real food, traditional food.
When it comes to food, what's kind of the next step protocol? Because I know for you, and this is what I love about your book, you did share a lot of your personal story within the book. And I'm just going to kind of explain it here a little bit, where you kind of went back into your last year of medical school. And you said that you experienced so many struggles going back into that environment, such as IBS. Like, I don't think you had a regular stool for like 2 years, which really shocked me when I read that. Acne all over your face, and so many other symptoms that were kind of coming up. And I think many listeners listening to this will also relate to that. So thinking about all of these mild symptoms, or maybe not even mild symptoms, that are appearing, when we're looking at food, which I'm very passionate about, what food is going to be nourishing us? What food should we kind of be pushing more towards? I know many of us are aware ultra-processed food should be out. But again, in this kind of conflicting health space with so many voices, what are the foods that are going to nourish this good energy?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on kind of the less fun part of the conversation, which is what we have to take out, right? Everyone wants to hear like that, but that is the truth. Ultra processed food, if there's one thing we know about nutrition, it's that the ultra processed food, it's hurting our cells. And I think about ultra processed food as like, it's an experiment that has failed. And we take it for granted that it's normal because it's like all over our shelves, but it's actually only about a 75-year-old experiment, this ultra processed food. And it's failed. It's ruining our soil. It's ruining our planet. It's also damaging our cells. So best thing anyone can possibly do is just basically reading labels and moving away from the foods that include the ultra processed refined grains, the ultra processed refined sugars, added sugars, and the ultra processed refined industrial seed oils that are made in factories, because these things are not supporting our cellular health. So that's the stuff to take out. But I think the more importantly, like you asked, is what do we put in? And I like to think about it, from the standpoint of very first principles, like what molecules do they need to function properly? And then ideally we'd put that stuff in the body through our food. And some of the things that we know really help our cellular biology, I think there's 5 main ones that I think about that I actually try and include in almost every meal. And I think about omega-3 fatty acids, at least one source of omega-3 fats, a rich source of antioxidants and micronutrients, a good source of probiotics, so actually live active cultures, healthy protein, and the last one is fiber, which is basically feeds our microbiome and then lets our microbiome make a bunch of amazing byproducts that then go into our bloodstream and support our health. So the way I actually stock my kitchen and I've developed recipes and how I cook and think is taking 4 or 5 of my favorite sources of each of those things and just making sure they're always at the ready at my house. And then when I make a meal, it's basically like mixing, matching from those categories. So for probiotics, I love kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, Greek yogurt, and kvass, which is like a low sugar kombucha. For healthy protein, I love ground elk and bison and venison and pasture raised beef and eggs and lentils and beans. So I've got those in the freezer or the pantry. For micronutrients and antioxidants, it's all the colorful fruits and vegetables from the store or the farmer's market, plus spices and herbs. But basically really colorful, fresh stuff. For fiber, I fill my house with beans and legumes and nuts and seeds, basil seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, sprinkle those on everything. And omega-3s, I've always got wild caught salmon and mackerel and, sardines in my pantry. I've got omega-3 rich eggs. I've got, hemp seeds and flax seeds and chia seeds, which are good plant-based sources. So I kind of have this mental list of these different foods and then put them all together. And I know that if I can ideally get one food from each of those categories in each of my breakfast, lunch, dinner, I'm going to do a lot to meet the needs of my cells in terms of metabolic health and really give them what they need. And there's a lot of controversy, obviously, about nutrition. I mean, a carnivore would hear that and say, oh my gosh, what is she talking about? Fiber is terrible. And, someone keto might say that you actually don't need any of the fiber or something like that. But so there's a lot of controversy. But what I always say is these 5 things in so much research, we know that support the molecular, both structure and function of cellular biology. But you don't actually have to take my word for it. Like no one listening has to actually take my word for it. You can try, I would say, any whole foods, unprocessed diet that is diverse and has lots of nutrient-rich food, and then track your symptoms and track your biomarkers. And I always say, if you're feeling incredible and you wake up with energy and joy and really no chronic symptoms, and your biomarkers, your key biomarkers are in the optimal range across all the metabolic biomarkers and other hormonal biomarkers, then you're probably on the right diet for you. But I can't see those things in the person listening. And so we should really get in touch with actually, we can cut through a lot of the nutrition controversy by becoming more familiar with our body awareness and our key biomarkers, tracking those regularly, and being able to be certain that the strategies we're doing are working for us. And so when someone comes at you on social media saying, oh, what are you doing? Why are you eating fiber? That's inflammatory. Beans are inflammatory. You can say, well, I've checked my inflammatory marker and it's super low. And all my autoimmune markers are negative. So I actually feel real, and I have no symptoms and I feel amazing. So I'm actually very comfortable with my beans and my legumes and my seeds. So I think that can be quite empowering for cutting through the noise, is like focus on a whole foods, high quality strategy that fits with your belief system and your values. Ideally, I think it would be valuable for everyone to include those 5 components that I mentioned based on what I know about the research. And then track your symptoms, track your biomarkers. And if things are moving in the right direction, that's a great sign.
What would you say are like the 5 foods that people should be including if we're thinking about reducing cancer risk or trying to starve that cancer?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tell you those 5 foods, but let me first say one more thing to set this up. Our body, to stay alive, makes 10,000 genetic mistakes every single day. Each of those mistakes can lead to a microscopic cancer. How do we know that we actually have microscopic cancers? Because we're not all walking around like filled with tumors, are we? Well, actually, this has been studied. In autopsy studies of women who died of not cancer, but car accidents, suicide, violence, 40% of women between the ages of 40 and 50 at autopsy are found to have these tiny little harmless microscopic breast cancers. 40%. 50% of men between the ages of 50 and 60, 50%, half, have microscopic cancers in their prostate. If this is from autopsy studies, if they died of something else, car accident or whatever, okay? And in people who are 70 or older, okay, 100% of those people have microscopic thyroid cancers that are so small, so harmless, so dormant, it'll never kill them, okay? They die of something else. And so the fact is, we already know that walking around, we all have little microscopic cancers. And by the way, this is changing our own definition of cancer as the scary disease. Because look, what I just told you, Sarah, is like cancer at its very origin, at its beginning, it's kind of like a pimple. If you see it on your face when you're looking in the mirror, you're washing your face, you're going to be focused on it. You're going to want to do something about it. But you know what? We've all got pimples growing on our backs and on our butts that we don't actually see every day. And they're not a problem. And eventually our body, our skin will regenerate and take care of it. And we'll never even know you had the problem. And that's really what the issue with cancer is. So what can we actually do to tip, using nutrition, to tip the chances that we can actually prevent the cancer through food, through nutrition? And this is actually what you're asking. Like, what are 5? There are hundreds of foods, by the way, but what are some top 5 I can come up with? And I'll try to give you some of their doses as well. All right, because dose is important. Food doses. So tomato. We already went to one. Tomatoes. Tomatoes have been shown to lower. Well, actually, regular tomatoes as well, but cooked tomatoes especially. Okay. Remember, cooking makes it just a lot better. But eating regular tomatoes is good. So, but the dose of cooked tomatoes is eating 1 serving, each serving being half a cup full of cooked tomatoes 2 to 3 times a week for trying to protect against prostate cancer. About the same for decreasing the risk of breast cancer by about 25%. Okay, one food. Wow. Another food, green tea. Now, there's all kinds of stuff about green tea. We all know it's green tea. It's the look. I have a background.
It really reminds me of you. Every time I make a green tea, I think of you.
Well, listen, my great uncle lived to 104, mentally sharp, independent, and he attributed his longevity, to really living at the foothills of a mountain that grew tea, and he drank tea continuously. But the research has shown, both in the lab and in clinical studies, that drinking somewhere between 2 to 4 cups of green tea per day actually lowers your risk of lung cancer, colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, pretty substantially. All right. And that's a good thing. So tomatoes, green tea. Another one that has been shown to be beneficial. Some people might be surprised to hear this. Soy foods, not processed soy, not artificial, not synthetic stuff, but actual soy. I'm not talking about plant-based meats. I'm talking about real tofu, tempeh, soy milk, that kind of stuff. And there's hundreds of kinds of soy foods in Asia. All right. You go to any Asian grocery store, if you look around, you'll see a myriad of choices of soy foods. If you go to Asia, I guarantee, like if you're from the Western world, you go to Asia for the first time, you're going to be overwhelmed at how many different kinds of choices you have with soy foods. And soy has been shown to reduce the risk of breast cancer. Okay.
This was what was in my mind when I was thinking, what cancer? Can I ask, before you explain why, to see if my thought process is right here? Is that more in women that are perimenopausal or menopausal because their estrogen levels drop, and having soy has got high estrogen in, and so it maybe replaces that? I don't know. That's just a concept that's coming to my brain when you said soy. I could be really off the mark.
It's the right idea, but let me kind of clarify it for you. So it turns out that, well, first of all, an urban legend is that all women should stay away from soy because soy has estrogen, and some forms of human breast cancer are sensitive to estrogen, so dangerous to actually eat soy. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. All right. In China, in Japan, in Vietnam, in Thailand, breast cancer is out there too. And I guarantee you, if women are diagnosed with breast cancer in Asia, they are not told to stay away from soy. In fact, they're told to eat more soy. And here's the reason why. Soy does have a plant estrogen called phytoestrogen. One of them is called genistein. And again, where did the urban legend come from? Look, some well-meaning soul knew that breast cancers are sensitive to estrogen sometimes, and they saw phytoestrogen, and they're like, well, I best stay away from soy then, and then use whatever communication medium to spread that urban legend around. And now everybody believes it. Even oncologists believe it. To be honest with you, like even doctors are repeating this urban legend. But here's the thing: if you are a scientist and you look at the actual chemical structure of human estrogen in breast cancer, and then you look at the phytoestrogen chemical structure, they don't look anything alike. And in fact, plant estrogens block human estrogen. So the soy estrogen is like tamoxifen. It's Mother Nature's tamoxifen. It blocks the effects of estrogen. So this is why, and by the way, the genistein in soy also cuts off the blood supply feeding breast cancers. All right. So you get a double-barreled effect. So a study of 5,000 women in China looked at the highest risk women, and these are women who already have breast cancer, and found that those women who consumed the most soy products, not processed soy, but soy products, actually had a 30% lower risk of dying of their breast cancer. 30. Okay. And if you were a woman who already had surgery and radiation and chemo, and you were out, you're in remission and just waiting for that 5-year mark kind of thing. Those women who had the most soy had a 30% reduction in their breast cancer coming back. All right. Wow. Cancer starving, estrogen blocking, all these other things as well. Now, and so this is where, having parts of the right information and trying to put them together is okay, but you got to double check it, for people who really understand the science. So I just gave you some clinical data showing reduction of risk, reduction of mortality. This was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. But some critics, some skeptics say, that's one study. Sure. Let me see another study. Well, I don't have one other study. I've got 14 other studies that all show the same thing. In no case is soy consumption associated with worse outcome. In every case, it's associated with better outcome. And yet there's this urban legend going around, like the same anti-nutrient story that you were talking about. This is why podcasts like this, YouTube things like this, and people who write books like me and you, that's why we have the responsibility to be able to try to communicate with clarity. what it is that we do know, right? Because I think otherwise remember I told you this, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, everybody starts to think they're an expert in this stuff and they're not.
Yeah, it's true. And this is why I started the show, because I was so fed up of hearsay around medical advice. And so I thought, let's just bring every top physician on here and let's just have the conversation so people can actually figure out what's right for them as an individual who's got their own genetic makeup, and they can make their own decision. And that's why we did the show, for this exact reason. So
I got 2 more foods to give you. I gave you tomatoes, I gave you green tea, I gave you soy. I'll give you another food that is, I think, quite important, is blueberries. Blueberries actually amplify our immunity. The anthocyanins that give blueberries their beautiful dark blue, black color actually cut off the blood supply to cancers. But at the same time, they also enhance our immunity. And what we now know is that our immune system, cutting off the blood supply, prevents the cancers from growing up. Remember what I told you, your immune system wipes them out. So you really want that. Blueberries are small but powerful. They're like totally good. And by the way, if you can't get fresh blueberries all year long, no problem. Frozen blueberries are also equally good. So, so that's number 4. And then I'll actually tell you that sort of the class of fruits like apples and pears are also beneficial. They are great sources of bioactives like chlorogenic acid. What does chlorogenic acid do in the lab? Cuts off the blood supply to cancers, but and it's also anti-androgenic, also starves off the blood supply, and improves immunity. But the dietary fiber in these foods also activate our gut health. They improve our gut health. Our well-fed gut bacteria lowers inflammation. They release the short-chain fatty acids, I'm sure you talked about before on your show. But the other thing they do is that a well-fed gut microbiome also directly nudges the immune system to say, hey, go out there and go get them and wipe out those cancer cells, those microscopic ones, okay? And so I would say this would be 5 foods that, by the way, are available anywhere, in a grocery store, inexpensively, right? That are delicious. And you can find different ways to cook it. Now, I didn't have time to talk about the bok choy, the shiitake mushrooms, about the garlic. I didn't talk about red onions. I didn't talk about rutabaga. There's a whole bunch of these other foods. And, I make these whole lists in my books, Eat to Beat Disease and Eat to Beat Your Diet. And the whole idea is that I think it's wonderful news that we're now beginning to understand that the foods that have been used by different cultures for hundreds of years, generations, these foods, like the one you held up, actually,
I was trying to show
they're delicious, and you can find something good. And by the way, this is the other thing. People go, man, what if I don't like blueberries, or what if I don't like apples? It's okay. You can easily swap them out with some other food that's on there. And so this is part of the fun of making healthy choices. This is not hard. It's easy. You just have to be selective, right? I mean, like people out there, you're listening to this. I'm sure at some point in your life, you discovered that you wouldn't just date anybody, but you wanted to be selective of who you took to the movies.
That is important, by the way.
Right,
yes,
right?
It's a very important decision. Who you spend your time with also affects your health.